Well, the Giant Man waited till the last day to see if it would fund or not, but fund it did, and in a way that no other major toy company crowdfund has done before. You see, since the sail barge kind of kicked off this modern major toy company crowdfund trend in 2018, there have been 18 major crowdfunds from companies like Super 7, Mattel, but mostly Hasbro. And with that many crowdfunds, people that are into analytics can start to find trends from the different crowdfunds. One of those people is Brian Brink, who has done an amazing job documenting all of the different analytics from all of these different crowdfunds. And for those who like to follow these crowdfunds like I do, I'm kind of just a geek for the math, we kind of are used to the trend with the Haslabs, and that is you have a day one spike, and then you kind of have a slowly inching along period in between the usual 47, 46 days for the entire project, and then on the last day you have a last day spike. But ideally, if you are Hasbro looking at the numbers, you want a really big day one that'll then continue to grow and then have a really nice last day spike just to kind of, hit maybe all of the tiers or get some extra orders in on that last day. But these crowdfunds aren't always successful. We can go back to the first failure, if you will, the poor Cookie Monster, which I backed, but unfortunately did not make it. But we have Star Wars with a couple failed attempts with the Rancor, as well as Reva's lightsaber. Mattel has had a few misses with the wrestling ring, as well as the Jurassic Park gate. But probably the one Haslab miss that caused the most controversy was the Engine of Vengence, otherwise known as the Ghost Rider Haslab, and it struck a nerve within the toy collecting community. I think for one, it wasn't a super fan demanded vehicle. It had some really nice unlockable tiers. It featured some, kind of deeper cut fan demanded characters that probably wouldn't see retail shelves, but I think the thing that got everyone really upset was with the overall price. Coming in at $350 for a 6-inch figure scale vehicle rubbed a lot of collectors the wrong way. Now, there are those that just say, you know what, it's not for me, it's too expensive, I'm not gonna buy it. But then there are those that, get into huge conspiracy theory mode, or corporations are evil and should never crowdfund for things. And while I don't necessarily disagree with some of those sentiments, I do think it's not that dire or dramatic. I think you can simply say it wasn't a huge fan demanded release and it was way too expensive. So when the Marvel team said they were doing their next Marvel Legends Haslab, after the controversy-filled failure of the Engine of Vengence, I think there's a bit of anxiety and apprehension for anybody involved, whether you like Haslabs, whether you like the crowdfunds, whether you hate the crowdfunds, whether you hate Hasbro. If you're probably the Marvel Legends team, if you're a Marvel Legends collector, I think we all were feeling this heightened, tense anxiety on whatever the next Marvel Legends Haslab would be and whether or not it would be successful. Then on September 8th, the Marvel Legends Hasbro team revealed their next Haslab, Giant Man. And for this release, I think they did everything they could possibly do to tee up a success after the failure of Engine of Vengence. For starters, they tapped back into a former Toy Biz BAF figure that was really popular and really expensive on the secondary market, much like the Galactus and Sentinel before it. It also didn't unlock any fan-demanded action figures within the tiers. The tiers end up just being nice faceplate swaps for your Giant Man figure. And I think they answered for probably the biggest critique of the Engine of Vengeance, its price tag. While the Engine of Vengeance was $350 and seemed way out of line for a 6-inch scale vehicle, they priced this Giant Man at a very reasonable $199.99. So they nailed it, right? They figured everything out, and this Haslab was a resounding success. Well, not quite. Even though it started off fairly strong with a day one total of over 3,100 backers, it kind of just creeped along from that point on. not counting the first couple Haslabs as well as the Galactus, which had a higher fun goal, and the Transformers releases, which behave a little bit differently because they're, shared with Takara. If a Haslab gets funded, it usually happens within the first week. The Sentinel got funded on day 2, Razor Crest day 2, his tank funded on the first day within 9 hours, the second G.I. Joe classified Haslab funded within 26 hours, the Ghost funded within 5 days, the Proton Pack within 10, even some of the non-Haslabs like the Eternia funded within 7 days, and the Cat Slayer funded within 12 days. That was not the case for the Giant Man. Even on day 45, the last day, it sat at 7,583 backers, well short of its 10,000 backer goal. But all hope was not lost. Most Haslabs and crowdfunds in general have a last day spike, and the wonderful Brian Brink projected that it would just skate by that threshold with its last day spike, pushing it to 10,700 and some odd backers. But that wasn't guaranteed, and really the uptick that kind of happens the few days before the last day wasn't as strong as even those original Brian Brink projections. So this thing being a lock to get backed was not a sure thing. But seemingly out of nowhere, without any additional incentives, the Giant Man exploded in its last day orders. Now again, last day orders for Haslab can include orders from third-party toy retailers that could be buying a lot, as well as resellers, and that's generally why you have a last day spike, as well as people like, oh, I intended to back it, I was just gonna wait to see if it passed or not. But what the Giant Man did was unprecedented. We can go back to the Star Wars Black Series Rancor set, which also was kind of closely humming along to its 9,000 backer goal and got really close on its last day at 8,533 backers, but it couldn't get across the finish line. Even though the Star Wars team tried to save the project by incentivizing its different tiers, it still couldn't get across the finish line. The only other Haslab to fund on the last day was the G.I. Joe Sky Striker, which got over nearly 9,000 backers on its last day. But there were some factors that were at play with that set. It closed the day after the Rancor, so you had those 8,533 people that backed the Rancor that now had the free funds to go into this Sky Striker. You also had the G.I. Joe team add a bonus if it hit its funding goal with additional Cobra figures as well as Cobra sticker sheets. That obviously worked to incentivize its last day of sales to cruise to a funding as well as hitting several of its tiers on the last day. The Giant Man didn't have any of that. They didn't incentivize it. There wasn't some other Haslab that didn't pass, so there was, funds freeing up for people. It's actually the opposite. There's probably way too many different crowdfunds right now that are taking dollars from collectors' wallets. But even still, it surged to fund in the last day, not only to its 10,000 backer minimum, but it also hit the 12,000 tier for the zombie faceplate, but it almost made it to the scroll faceplate at 14,000. It's an absolutely incredible bounce back for the Giant Man, and it has me questioning what the heck happened. I think it's multiple factors. For starters, there is something known as figure FOMO, and I think once people saw this thing was getting backed, there was probably a good amount of collectors that decided they didn't want to miss out on their chance to own this Giant Man. They may have poo-pooed the idea or said they didn't really want it, but when a push came to shove, they didn't want to miss out on it. That's number one. Number two, this is going to be one of the lowest print run Marvel Legends Haslabs, and it will probably carry a pretty hefty secondary market price. If you look at the Sentinel, they made over 21,000 of those things. They made over 30,000 Galactuses. Galacti? So this Giant Man is going to have less than 14,000 of them made, and it should carry a pretty hefty secondary market price. And I also wonder if there were a lot of online orders from third-party toy retailers. But again, it's very rare to have that many orders on the last day. So I think there was a big sense of figure FOMO that really let this thing soar in its last day. Kind of course correcting for the rather slow run that it had during the entirety of the previous 45 days of this Haslab. Does the success of the last day for Giant Man reinforce some of the changes that the Marvel Legends team implemented with this Giant Man? Personally, I hope so. I like the fact that there were no figures that were paywalled essentially behind tiers. I like that the price point was really reasonable. Honestly, if you're looking at Toy Biz BAF versions of the Giant Man, which is inferior to this Giant Man, those were going for $250 on the secondary market. I think the price was great on this thing. And I'm really glad that them actioning on that feedback from the previous Engine of Vengeance was rewarded with a successful Haslab. Was it successful enough for this to be the go-forward process? I'm not sure, but I am thankful that it was successful. I know a lot of hard work was put into it. I know there were a lot of Marvel and Marvel Legends fans that really wanted this figure, and I'm happy for those that got it, that wanted it. Will how this Giant Man perform become the new normal for different major toy company crowdfunds, or will it continue to be an outlier among the many? Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. I gotta give a big thanks to Brink for doing additional chart magic for this video. Please check out his YouTube channel that he is a part of called The Realm of the Collectors. I'll put a link in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, hit the like button. If you want to see more of him, hit the subscribe and that bell icon. And until next time, hasta luego and goodbye.